Hello and welcome to this Bank One webinar. My name is Samantha Siwusaran. I'm the co-founder of the Pan-African news portal Platform Africa, and I'll be your moderator for today's session, where we will be exploring the timely theme, The Future is Africa, How Expat Talents Can Maximize Opportunities. I'm delighted to be joined by an expert panel, who I will now introduce. First of all, we have Nicolas Goldstein, who is the co-founder of Talenteum.com. Nicolas is a French entrepreneur and the co-founder of the company, which is a Pan-African international employer of records business, which is evolving as a connector between companies based in advanced economies and African talents. Second today, we have Rene Stegmann. Rene is the director and owner at Relocation Africa. She's an entrepreneur at heart with a real passion for Africa and making Africa better. She's an experienced director with a demonstrated history of working in mobility, research, immigration, international payroll, and payment sectors within global mobility. Her natural strength lies in strategy and specifically strategic marketing with a strong sense of sustainable business into the future. She holds an MBA in strategic marketing from the University of Hull. And then third, we have Bhavya with us. Bhavya is the head of personal financial services at Bank One. Bhavya brings nearly 2 decades of retail banking experience with a deep international exposure across Asia, Europe, and America. He's played key roles in strategy, customer propositions, digital and innovation, customer experience, product marketing, and marketing. So before moving to Bank One, Bhavya was working for HSBC, where his last role was that of Global Head of Retail Propositions, Wealth and Personal Banking. He holds an MBA from the University of Delhi, a Bachelor of Science from the University of London, as well as a Bachelor in Commerce from the University of Calcutta, and he's been with Bank One since June 2021. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Bhavya, I'd like to stay with you a bit more to hear about the rationale for this webinar. So we obviously now have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is slowly being implemented. And this is intended to boost intra-Africa trades, and which by extension should encourage greater mobility. We also see that certain cities, such as Nairobi, Cape Town, or Johannesburg, are attracting a high number of expats, both from within Africa and also outside. So can you tell us, Bhavya, before we get started, why are we having this webinar today?
Thanks, Samantha, and hello to our guests here, everyone. So COVID's done and dusted behind us, and what we're seeing is mobility is back on the rise, and we are seeing an uptick in people moving across countries. But that doesn't come with it comes with its own sets of challenges, and we'll chat about it, I hope, through this session. I'm a serial expat. I've been, as Samantha mentioned in my bio, I've moved across a lot. And, we've built a very unique perspective on how to make life of an expat easier as they navigate the challenges ahead of them and the opportunities ahead of them. So we thought that now with mobility back on the rise, it's perfect time to get together a group of folks to chat about the opportunity, chat about some challenges, and chat about how we can help.
Great. Well, thank you very much there, Bhavya. So before we get started then with the discussion, I would just like to invite all of the audience to post any questions that you may have in the chat box, and then we'll be taking them towards the end. So let's make a start then with Nicolas. So Nicolas, tell us a bit about the trends that you're seeing in the labour market in Africa. What are you seeing in terms of expat flows?
Yes, first of all, I'm very excited to be with you today. So I really like the webinar, The Future is Africa, because a lot of people doesn't think that Africa is booming. And I've moved myself in Africa 7 years ago in Mauritius, and I'm so happy to still be here. And I see how it's growing and moving. So to come back to your queries, what kind of flow I see? For example, I would like to tell about 2 stories. One is the story of Yaya. Yaya is a guy from Senegal. He left Senegal 6 years ago. He left for doing his studied in France. So he studied during 3 years. And after his studies, he found a job in France, and he remained in France for 3 years. And a few months back, he called me. He said, Nicolas, I want to go back to Senegal in my country. And I look at him. I said, yeah, you want to come back in your country in Africa, but you have a decent salary in France, and you want to. Everybody is going to France, and you want to go back in Africa. And he looked at me and said, Nicolas, the future is in Africa. Europe is a whole continent. Africa, it's a booming continent. I want to be back in my continent and in my country. So this is the flow that I can see. People, they learn what is going on outside, and they want to come back in Africa. This is what we call the repats. But he has seen what is going on in Europe, and he's going back now in his country. So this is one flow I can see. People who have seen what is going on in Europe, and now they are going back. He was very smart because he's coming back with a European salary in his country. That's why he's calling us, because he wants us to do the employer of records in Senegal. So that was clever for him because he keep a good salary and he's coming back in his country. So this is the flow I see. And recently in Mauritius, I met someone from Kenya. His name is Chris, and I said, why did you move to Mauritius? Kenya is also a big hub for doing business. He said, but Nicolas, I'm in the finance industry. Mauritius is a good hub for Africa. And I think it's good to have mobility in Africa. And we are going where the best country is for the job we are doing. I have an opportunity. It's an easy country to make business. There is no change with the bank. So you can have euro, dollars, and the local currency in Mauritius. So it's easy to open in Mauritius. So that's why this is a story of a Kenyan guy who moved to Mauritius. So based on your personal expertise, people are moving in Africa, and it's based also on expertise. So this is a two story I wanted to share with you, and I see a lot of engagements of people coming back to Africa or moving in Africa.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Nicolas, for sharing those personal stories. I think it really starts to bring the discussion to life when we hear some of those. I'd then like to move on to Rene, looking at the relocation perspective. So Rene, you're dealing with this every day. What are some of the biggest challenges that expats are facing when they're moving into or across Africa? Can you give us some examples from your own experience recently?
Sure, and also, like Nicolas said, great to be here, and Africa close to my heart, and certainly have a passion for Africa. So, not to kind of make the same mistake a lot of people will make, every country in Africa is completely different. So the challenges in each of the locations are different. And so not to kind of, I will be generalizing because we have to, otherwise I'd be talking about 54 countries in all different ways and different challenges. So I'm going to try and generalize a little bit, but just to make it clear that each country has different challenges. So I think some of the bigger challenges come around a lot of the red tape, paperwork, immigration skips to the top of my mind in terms of the legislation. In some of the countries, the changing legislation, it's very difficult to keep up as an expat as to what particular work permit category you should be applying under. So those are big challenges. Security, it would be a miss if I didn't mention security does come up as a challenge. What is interesting in a survey I was just looking at recently, the clients though who come to Africa don't often not come because of security. It's more that they'll come and they need to be aware of what the security protocols are, how best to protect themselves and their families while they're on a host assignment. So I think that's nice to know if you're a company moving expats around, don't kind of hide it under the sort of carpet, talk about it openly, because often it doesn't impact their ultimate decision. I think there was 61% who it doesn't impact their decision, 39% it may. But talk about it openly and manage those expectations and put protocols in place. I think cultural training, in terms of understanding the culture you're moving to, is another challenge, because people, again, whether it's into Africa, often from one country to another, people go, oh, they're African, they'll be fine, you don't have to worry about it. But it's these little nuances and cultural norms and practices that can often isolate an expat and make that experience, untainable and lead to a failed assignment. Oops, there goes my electricity, a challenge. There you go. So in South Africa, we have infrastructure challenges, which include electricity. And so those are some of the practical things. But again, if we are able to manage these expectations with the expats, they often are then going to enjoy the experience better, knowing what the problems are, than kind of being surprised by some of these realities that we all know about in country. Banking, sorry, bank one, but banking is a big challenge in Africa. And I think it comes a lot around, you know, again, the paperwork, some of the processes, maybe old processes that haven't been adapted. You know, most of our expats certainly are coming on a legitimate work contract with a work permit, which has a certain amount of protocol that's been run, you know, to kind of maybe adapt banking practices to allow for expats to sort of have a soft opening of account, because often it is dependent on, you know, your lease agreement, your you know, the certain things, and it makes that kind of chicken and egg scenario very difficult for an expat. Those are some of the ones that come to the top of my mind in terms of some of the challenges. It's often around the logistics, but I don't want to sort of doom and gloom with everyone, because on the balance of that, the experience of having an expat assignment in Africa, I recently chatted to one of our clients who left, and they said it was one of their best assignments. And it's because of the deep experiences, both good and bad, you know, which is great, because they walk away with life experiences and adding to your basket of, you know, experiences as you walk through the rest of your life. So yes, it's lots of challenges, but it's not all doom and gloom, because it is a fantastic experience that people walk away with.
Well, thank you, Rene, for sharing your insights with us. Bhavya, I'd like to come to you. I know that you're a citizen of the world. You may have faced many of those challenges on Rene's list. So tell us a bit from your own personal perspective. How can expats solve some of these challenges when they're moving to a new country, including those that are related to banking, as Rene has just mentioned? And for you, Bhavya, are there any particular strategies or resources that have been able to help you on your own path?
Yeah, I mean, banking, definitely. Rene, I fully agree with you. Banking tends to be a worry point whenever somebody is thinking about expatriation. In fact, there was a recent study that showed that 2 out of 3 people who are moving either back or overseas or within regions, one of their top worries was banking, because documentation, account opening, and all is hard. Quite often, you can't move your credit histories. The products available across countries sometimes tend to be very and sometimes less sophisticated. There are taxation kind of like situations that you have to deal with, etc. So banking is complex and hard, right? Now, when we look at the world of expats, we think of kind of expats typically tend to be, there are some suckers like me who travel all around, who we call serial expats. And then there are kind of a great number of people who are what we call periodic expats, who will work overseas somewhere for a while, go back home, and then maybe go do after another gig somewhere else, come back home, etc. Now, irrespective of what kind of an expat you are, we very strongly believe that if you are an expat, then you need at a minimum 3 kind of like banking accounts or banking relationships. You need one in your home country, because there will always be expenses related to just, you know, stuff back home, paying for your home, paying for your old parents, etc. Right? You need a second account, which is what we would say in your host country, where you are, because naturally there are local transactional needs. And then the third thing you need, which is what sometimes people kind of ignore, and it makes it all the more harder, is you need an offshore account. The reason you need an offshore account over and above the home and host account is to let you move around the world without having to have the money move with you. And this is critical, because if you have to move the money with you, then that is expensive, that is complicated, that is cumbersome. So that's where I think, where you could solve some of the banking needs. having an offshore account, and this is where kind of like Bank One specializes in. We have a proposition called Elite Offshore, which is just solely focused on offshore, expatriate clients. And we are able to provide a suite of solutions, be it foreign currency accounts, multi-currency cards, a range of kind of investment options worldwide that you wouldn't have access to in the country you're in. So we have a solution that is designed to be able to help expats move around without having to have the money moved. But the trick here, and I think the point that you were asking was, what is your personal strategy and guidance, right? And I think to me, that one thing would be, you have to sort your banking before you move. And quite often, in the kind of in the rush of actually having to relocate with your family, etc., into another country, people leave their banking to be sorted last. Oh, I'll get there and do it. And that is where a lot of the problems stem from. You've got to, and this is where, again, offshore banking is critical. It helps. It gets your banking needs in the country sorted without even having to be there. Because Elite Offshore, like any other kind of offshore proposition, allows you to get it all done remotely, digitally, get your kind of accounts, cards, and everything else sorted. Even when you don't have your address sorted right now, even when you don't have your electricity sorted right now yet, etc. Because the moment you land, you're going to have a bunch of challenges settling into a new country, new work, new social circles, the logistics, as Rene was talking about. You can resolve the banking problem even before you get there. So that would be my one guidance, right, to expats, whether they are kind of like expert serial expats or periodic ones, is firstly, do not forget the third leg of the pyramid, which is the offshore account, in addition to your home and host. And secondly, try and resolve that even before you travel, even before you move.
Very sound advice there, Bhavya. So thank you for sharing that. Let me move back again to Nicolas to talk about some of the trends that we've been seeing. So Nicolas, share with us a bit in terms of the sectors or skills. Where is the demand coming from, and which countries in particular are being seen as hotspots for expat talent? And then coming on to remote work, which is an area where you're extremely active yourself. How is remote work and technology affecting labour mobility in Africa? And are we also seeing some government policies that may help the growth of what we call digital nomads, helping people to move around with their work? So Nicolas, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Samantha. So first of all, I would like to know if you all guys know what is the 3E in Africa. Bhavya, Rene, or someone knows what is the 3E in Africa? No?
No.
Okay. 3E, it's energy, education, and entrepreneurship. So the key of if Africa wants to be the next booming continent, they need to invest in these three sectors: energy, education, and entrepreneurship. And this is where we see that we have the most of demand. Of course, all the gas and oil industry are still in Africa, and this is what we call the energy. But now they need to think about green energy, sustainable energy, and this is where we see a lot of new business coming in, and where we need a lot of skilled labor about the sustainable and how to move from the old economy of energy and with the new economy. So the energy and solar energy, this is we see a lot in Africa, solar energy. A lot of people from Western countries are coming in Africa to invest in solar energy. Then education. Education, as we know that the population is young and they are going to triple the size, we need to invest in human capital, in education. And that's why we see a lot of initiatives like the African Leadership University investing in African talents of tomorrow, or a lot of foundations like MasterCard Foundation investing in talents, paying universities to African talents. And then entrepreneurship. We see more and more African people building their own startup, building their own company. because it has to come from Africa. Africa has to build their next success stories. It has to come from African people. That's why entrepreneurship is very important, and I know that they have understood that. So these are the three main industry where we need to invest and where there is opportunity. Then in which country we see the most demand? Of course, for example, all the industry of the startup and the tech industry, it's mainly in Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and now a little bit Morocco. So this is four main countries where you have the most VC and investing people in these four main countries: Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya, and Morocco. And then we have also other opportunity, like Mauritius. It's a small country, but we see a lot of people coming, a lot of expats coming to Mauritius because the cost of living is fine compared to other African countries, and there is let's say it's a easy country to start. So this is what I see. And compared to remote work, of course, we have more and more digital people coming, mainly foreigner coming to Africa, but the people who are coming in Africa with a digital visa or premium visa, they are not remaining in the country. So I think that this is the wave we see after COVID, but I don't think it's a sustainable wave I see coming in this country. They are staying 1 year, 2 years in the country. If they like the country, they stay, but let's say that 50% or 60% of them, they are not remaining in the country. But at least it's good, because what is good is to have a mix of local people, expats, experts, and this is the future. We need a lot of melting pots, and that will be the future. And to finish about that, I like to go to Cape Town or in South Africa. And what I see, why South Africa is a big country with a wealthy country, even if there is a lot of things going bad currently in South Africa, but it's still a great country because there is people from all over Africa coming to South Africa. When I go in South Africa, I speak French because I see a lot of Cameroonese people, Senegal, Congo. I speak with people from all over Africa in South Africa. And for me, when I go to Cape Town, it's like it's the California of South Africa, because I see all these people coming to South Africa. So that's why we need a mix of people. That will be the success of the country. We are open to that.
So I think we'll carry on with Rene for the next round. So Rene, could you tell us a bit about some of the common misperceptions that people have been seeing?
Sure. And I actually just wanted to pick up on Nicolas's point. I mean, the continent is full of young talent, and from an education perspective, we need to sort of up our ante on educating this young talent to be able to utilize them. We've recently, before I go into answering the question, is seen a client who set up specifically in South Africa to sort of take advantage in the nicest possible way of our young talent, which is great because globally there is a huge talent shortage. And within Africa, we have a lot more available talent, unfortunately not always educated to the level we need to. So we really need investors to invest heavily into education. And we are seeing a little bit of that, as you mentioned, MasterCard Foundation and other foundations who are active in Africa. And in fact, I think Rwanda has set up quite an interesting sort of IT sector, which is they're trying to be sort of the center of Africa and the world in terms of some of the development that they're doing in the IT sector. So just back to your question, Samantha, I think, in terms of misconceptions, again, one of the things I spoke earlier about is security. I think companies sending in expats, whether they are young talent, for whatever purpose in terms of either a career development or an actual assignment for career growth, we need to make sure that the duty of care or security and both elements are addressed. So we have a lot of big American firms actually in South Africa, but at the moment setting up actually, and in Nigeria, in fact, all the countries Nicolas mentioned, one of these high-tech companies who are sending in young talent. And the problem is there's this in the sort of reward space, there's a sort of term called lump sum. And what they do is they give these young candidates, your lovely package plus a lump sum to relocate into a country. Now, the problem is in Africa is that lump sum may be great because it covers a lot of the relocation costs. It's obviously being calculated in a way that makes sense to the employer, to make the return on investment feasible. But what often happens is that lump sum is not utilized 100% correctly or with suitable knowledge. So they send these young graduates in a lot of cases into a country, even like in a city like Cape Town, which is fairly established. But these, finding accommodation within a certain budget so they can put some of that relocation allowance back in their pocket often puts them in a very precarious situation. And then the problems start coming. So, for example, we had one case recently where the company came back to us and said, please, could you help get this young graduate out of their lease agreement and put them in a more suitable accommodation. So that the cost implication and the reputational risk for the company, not adhering to at least getting what I would say is a reputable company to support them from a relocation perspective, would be kind of a miss in terms of some of the reputational risk they may be facing and not taking a duty of care on these candidates. And just to give you a bit of an example, at Relocation Africa, COVID was a great invigorator of innovation in terms of coming up with products to serve clients, more remotely. So we have, packages that could suit graduates coming in, 100 graduates coming into a university, for example, they can access a portal which gives them all the advice and information pertaining to their city that they're relocating to. So it doesn't have to cost the company a lot of money, but it is more around finding suitable support to support these young candidates. So that would be, I would say, my first really strong point is the duty of care. Also, I'd say managing expectations. We spoke again about what does that look like. There's certain information that we can't hide. You don't want these assignees coming in and having a surprise at any moment with their assignment that they're going to have. So it is around building that expectation appropriately, telling them what sort of housing they can expect. If there's a shortage of housing, to let them know that, so when they're here and they're not frustrated because they can't find suitable housing, or even if it's immigration, that, especially during COVID, there was a lot of delays and red tape that caused a lot of frustration and delayed assignments into countries. So it's really about expectation setting and management to allow those expats to ease into a country a lot easier. So those are some of my, I guess, misconception management tools that I would go about using.
Great, thank you very much then, Rene. Before we go on to the last question to Bhavya, I'd just like to remind everyone, do put your questions into the chat, because once we've gone through this last question, we will then be starting on our questions. So we're looking forward to seeing those in a moment. So Bhavya then, coming back to you as an expat yourself, how would you describe the advantages and also the unique opportunities that Africa offers to expats, both in terms of professional growth and also in terms of personal development? And why do you think that more people should consider this as an opportunity?
Sure. Look, this is an area that I'm very, very passionate about. And I think it's not just about Africa, but more so for Africa, but it's about expatriation in general. I see there are two core strands of benefits. The first one being the professional and the other one being kind of the personal. Now, on the professional side, Africa is rapidly growing. Education, as both Rene and Nicolas mentioned, is a key priority area. But the fact is, as it stands right now, there are severe labor shortages in many sectors, and especially there are severe skill gaps in many areas. And that actually creates an environment of opportunity for people who are able to move around, who are interested in moving around, actually coming over into Africa to address, to actually go in and fit themselves into those skill gaps and labor shortages can really, really help rocket up their careers, either in terms of learning new skills, this sharing back, I guess, the ways of working they would have learned in other markets, but also kind of expanding holistically into larger, bigger roles, taking on greater challenges so that when they then head back somewhere else, right, they're now going back with an experience in a difficultish market, an emerging area which actually comes with its own sets of kind of real great learning opportunities. So I think from a professional point of view, I see a lot of upsides of expatriation in general, but actually expatriation into Africa, if you think of it as a learning and a growth kind of like ground, I think is phenomenal. You can really carve a niche out for yourself through that, and you can leverage that elsewhere. But then on the other benefit to me personally is just the fact that as you and your family live across different kind of countries, I strongly believe that it really enriches your life. As you travel into new places that you wouldn't have ever been to, as you understand different cultures, as you understand different peoples and ways of working, I think you create a bunch of stories and you create a bunch of experiences that will stay with you throughout. And even actually after you're gone, those stories will live through with the families if you move with the family. I genuinely believe that obviously it's not for expatriation, it's not for everyone, but for those that are interested in enriching their lives and also kind of really, really stretching their kind of career opportunities, expatriation is great, and particularly South Africa. My one word of advice, though, which would be that sometimes it is easy. Sometimes it is easy as you move into a new country to, I guess, get stuck in an expat cocoon where you're hanging out with doing stuff with other expats. But to me, that takes away a large chunk of the whole enrichment that that experience can bring. And I think, you've got to immerse yourself where you are. So that would be my kind of like personal advice. But look, at the same time, it would be remiss of me to do a shameless plug at the very end, right? Which is all of this is great, career, professional kind of growth, personal enrichment, etc. But you've got to make sure that it is financially right, that it financially also works for you, whether you stay there, whether you move out, etc. And to make sure that it financially works for you, and that you're building on your hopes, dreams, and ambitions through that, you have to bank not just with whatever your kind of local opportunities might be, but with with experts who focus on these segments, right? So anyone listening in wants to find out more about that, hey, you know what? Just reach out to me. I'd love to share more about how Elite Offshore can help.
Great, thank you very much there, Bhavya. So we'll now be coming in on to our questions. I'd like to start with a question for Nicolas, which is a bit about the expat ecosystem. So you've talked a bit about Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and also Morocco emerging as places for demand. Is there something, Nicolas, that these countries have in common in terms of the way that they've built an ecosystem which is appealing for expats? Are there some secrets in there that you can share with us from your own networks where other countries may need to go down the same path?
Yeah, in fact, what I see is if the governments of these countries are proactive to attract people, they just communicate online on social network and they just attract people. So I know that Nigeria wanted to build a e-resident visa like Estonia was doing. So in fact, they are seeing what is going on elsewhere, and they are trying to do the same. I don't remember about Rwanda. Rwanda have made a big announcements last year or 2 years ago about they wanted to become a financial hub. So now we are not listening to them anymore, but a lot of people have been to Rwanda, and there is a lot of traction in Rwanda. It's a marvelous country, and they have promoted themselves. So in fact, it's just when you promote your country, you just attract people, and that's why all these countries, when they are proactive, they can attract people. And now, compared to also, if you have some issue about electricity, like we can see in South Africa, it's not good to bring people, because when I go and see remote workers in South Africa, and they said that we have to invest in a big power bank, because otherwise we can't work. It's perhaps not so cool, and I will advise them to go to Mauritius, where we don't have this issue. So we have to see in all these countries where we have the best opportunity to go. And Kenya, there is no power cut, so I will perhaps go to Kenya or Mauritius instead of South Africa. And Nigeria, it's a booming country, but perhaps they are not controlling too much the growing population. So it's just how you market the country yourself in order to attract the best people.
And
Thank you very much.
Pam, if I can of like just build
Please
on
do.
that.
Yes.
So I think for a lot of this, one of the other things that really matters is the power of the network and stories, right? Is I've seen a phenomenal number of cases where you would see somebody take the leap of faith, go into a country and have some phenomenal experiences, do some great work. They will talk about it to the friends and family. That actually then triggers for some people, maybe this is something I'm also interested in. And then they will start looking at opportunities there as well. So what you quite often do see, right, in terms of the big expat flows, the migration flows, is quite often there are clusterings where the networks are actually also moving alongside as they hear more, as they learn more. So yeah, that would be just one take on that.
And I will say that before moving to a country, and when you start in a country, you have to analyze everything. You have to talk to local people. You have to learn by yourself. For example, myself, when I even if I knew Mauritius when I arrived 8 years ago, the 6 first months was very difficult. I thought I was doing business very easily, and it was not like this. I'm not a Mauritian, so it was not so easy. So that's why I decided to work with my European network remotely, and now I can work with Mauritian people, but after a few years. So it took time to build your network. So you need to be patient, you need to be wise and smart, because Africa, it's not one country, it's a continent, and each country is different. So I have learned by working in Africa.
Great, thank you, Nicolas. Well, on the point, Nicolas, that every country is different, I'd like to come on to a question on the legal aspects, which I think I will ask to Rene in the first instance. So the question is, what legal rights do expat partners have in the host country? Rene, I think that's one where we'll start with you.
Okay, I love challenging questions, but so this particularly is such an interesting one for me, because in some countries, it's favorable to an expat partner to be able to work, volunteer, etc. In other countries, it's not. So South Africa is one, it's not favorable, and you have to apply as an independent worker and on your own rights be able to qualify for a work permit, for example. So it is complicated. What I would encourage businesses and associations and all of us to continually do is to align with, there's something called the Work Permit Foundation. Work Permit Foundation is a non-for-profit that has membership companies that all try and lobby governments. And at the moment, I know one of the countries they are currently lobbying is South Africa, in terms of this exact thing, in terms of basically that dual partner career. one of the things, we talk about all these favorable conditions in country, foreign direct investment policies, attracting investors and people to actually take up job opportunities or entrepreneurship opportunities. The Africa Free Trade Zone in terms of making it more favorable within Africa to trade. Immigration and the legal capability for various aspects, not only immigration, but even things like the whole GDPR in terms of operating in a data protected kind of environment. Some countries in Africa have no data protection law governing that country. So, there's a hell of a lot of that we don't have and that we need to lobby for. And on human rights issues, same-sex partnership in some countries, it's illegal, and so it is really challenging conversations again. But these are things that we do need to lobby governments for, to kind of adjust to allow that attractive investment and people movement to flow. And as Nicolas was saying, there's a lot of potential, but it is up to each of these countries to kind of go, how attractive do I want to make my country and what sort of environment do I want to create? I mean, South Africa, there's still kind of, a large protectionism sort of in, employ South Africans first. But actually from a global marketplace, it's not necessarily the best position for the country to maybe necessarily align with if it's not allowing us to gain traction from an investor perspective. So yeah, complicated question. I would say, align with Work Permit Foundation on the sort of immigration front and other organizations who we can lobby to change legislation for it to be more investor and people flow attractive. People's one of our biggest commodities on the continent of Africa. We have potential to trade, these skill sets if they're developed appropriately. So I think we need to be mindful of that.
Thank you very much, Rene. Nicolas, I was just wondering whether in your own experience you've had any particular issues on the legal side that you'd like to share with us at all?
Well, for example, I remember that for me, it was easy to open a bank account at Bank One and MCB, but I had some issue, for example, with Barclays, and they just after 3 years they wanted to ask a lot of questions about me. They said, "What is your business?" But I said, "I'm known. I have a lot of things already in Mauritius. I'm not new." So the problem is bank. It's always taking time to open a bank account and so on. So finally, I have opened a bank account on a virtual bank account, which takes 2 days, and they just do the SLA online, So also you have other option. You need to have big bank like Bank One or the bank, but also you need to have some virtual bank, which is easy, like Payoneer, or I don't know about Wise. Sometimes it's very useful for remote workers and when it's possible in your country.
Great, thank you very much, Nicolas.
And also, which is difficult for expats, it's to get a visa to work. So in Mauritius, it's almost fine to get it. But for example, in Morocco or in Tunisia, I know it's hard to get a visa in these countries. Hopefully it will evolve. But Mauritius, it's easy to get a visa if you have a resume and if you follow all the steps. But otherwise, it's also a tricky part to take care of before moving.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. Well, that's good to hear you've had a positive experience with Bank One. So maybe, Bhavya, from the bank's perspective, could you share a few views with us here on your own perspective on the legal side?
Well, on the legal side, I guess, I think Rene covered most of it, right? Every country is different. There are some that are very friendly to be able to work with, and there are some that are not. Where from a banking perspective, the legal piece I think I will share is Bank One is a bank for Africa from Africa, right? So we get Africa. This is what we do day in, day out. So there are often, and Nicolas mentioned some banks, but there are lots of banks, especially if they are not from Africa, they've really struggled with the nuances and intricacies of an African life. For example, you may not have an address that is precisely structured like it would be in Europe with a number and a street name and a pin code and all of that, right? Sometimes it is just a piece of paper. Sometimes your address proof, sometimes some of the other documentation are very different to what you would see elsewhere. And if you're looking for an offshore bank to be able to help with your banking needs, I think what you have to consider is who will understand you the most. And this is where Mauritius plays a key role. And this is where Elite Offshore, which is Bank One's kind of proposition for it, actually really stands out. Because we get this market, we know how to work with what is available locally.
Thank you, Bhavya. We now have a financial question, Bhavya, which I think I'll send first in your direction. So it's about pensions. What will happen to my pension, says the questioner. Can an expat still contribute to their existing pension plan while based in another country? And how does this affect tax relief on contributions? Well, that's a big question. So, Bhavya.
And again, unfortunately, the answer is it depends. It depends based on the pension rules of that country. And it is a very important kind of conversation to be had when deciding whether expatriation is right for you and deciding whether that particular country is right for you, etc. Because there are various countries and various pension providers who do allow you to continue contributing no matter where you are. But there are some where you must have a local pension. So that means unless you're willing to top up your international pension and your local pension, you are ending up kind of putting money into pensions. So it's not a straightforward answer. But the great thing is, and this is where kind of like Elite Offshore starts really helping expats, which is the great thing is that there are pension solutions out there that are again designed for expats so that no matter where you are, you can continue contributing. And that becomes your one central place. And from a tax kind of like implication perspective, again, this is one of the benefits of leveraging international financial centers like Mauritius, right? Where there are no capital gains tax, no withholding tax, and a series of fiscal kind of like conditions that actually make it more efficient than pretty much anywhere else.
Thank you, Bhavya. We have another big question, which I think I'll send for Rene to answer, which is about purchasing a house. What can you advise on purchasing a house in a foreign country? With a couple of question marks. Rene, any quick tips for us? Because I realise we're getting towards the end of the session.
Sure. Look, I mean, again, it's quite a general, question for a continent that has 54 countries. My advice is firstly to look into, if you're going to buy in a foreign country, can you get your money out? Okay, so there are countries where you may not be able to easily get your money out. Ethiopia pops into mind. In Nigeria recently, we had troubles getting money out for a client. So just do your due diligence in terms of, if I'm going to make that investment, like any investment, am I going to be able to extract that investment? So that was the first thing. The second thing is, not often do you get 100% of a loan to buy a house in some countries. There's because you're a foreigner, there'll be certain rules allowing you to be able to purchase with a certain amount has to be sort of cash up front kind of thing, and then the next can be a loan from a bank. So look at the kind of financial implications, I guess, for yourself. I would also err on the side of caution of buying. I mean, obviously expats go in for a shorter period of time. They're not permanent necessarily, but we do have permanent expats as well who want to purchase at some stage. My advice there is go and live in the house you want to buy for a period of time before you buy it, because like anywhere in the world, south-facing, north-facing could be good or bad. Is it on a busy road, or is it close to a noisy restaurant, or is the landlord, not told you about some of the problems that you'll be faced with once you purchase that property? So, a little bit of logic in terms of maybe go and live in it, or at least live in the area where you'd like to buy that property. It gives you a lot more information. I think it is like any investment, right? It's a big one. And then also, you have to manage and monitor the markets, because in certain countries, when there's political instability or change of circumstances, it is very difficult to actually sell your property as well. So, I mean, Johannesburg, just to give you an example, in South Africa, a lot of people are suddenly leaving Johannesburg. The roads aren't being maintained. There's a whole lot of problems, and they're all coming down to Cape Town or Mauritius or where else they're going. So, if you bought a property in Johannesburg, hoping to extract your investment, not now. It's not a good time to sell. So hang on to that investment, rent it out to an expat, hopefully, and wait until the market changes. So, but it is a big question, and hopefully I've given some insights.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add just 2 points to that, Rene. I fully agree with you. I think the first thing I'll talk about is not to underestimate the impact of FX. Because I think, as you quite rightly said, you've got to be very clear around why you're buying, where you're buying, can you get the money out, etc., right? But I've seen stories where people get seduced by oh my God, look at the rate at which the property prices are growing in city X, city Y in Africa versus, let's say, a city Z in Europe. But then what you then sometimes fail to kind of bring into that calculation is how the currency itself is depreciating, let's say, or other kind of reasons. You've got to make sure you understand what's the real and the net kind of like benefit of doing it. If it's for investment, if it's for kind of like a second home, a holiday home, then obviously it doesn't matter. So I think people sometimes underestimate that impact. And then the other thing is, if you are kind of not already residing in that country, you live somewhere else and want to buy the property, in most of Africa, it is really, really difficult to get any kind of mortgage or facility around it, right? If you're not there. Extremely difficult, unlike some of the more developed cities. So either you've got to be willing to pony up cash, right? If you're not living there already and have a credit history, etc. So you've got to be able to either pony up cash or, and again, shameless plug, which is why we're doing it. This is where offshore banking also comes in, is sometimes actually you're able to create financing opportunities based on the relationship that you have with your offshore bank in foreign currency to serve those needs. This is actually core part of solution for elite offshore as an example. So these are ways we could help, but I think Rene is right. You've got to be very clear around purpose and ability to kind of extract value.
Thank you very much, Bhavya. Well, we're almost out of time, so I just have one last question for each of you, and I'll start with Rene for this one. So Rene, you have a lot of experience in this space. What would you say would be 3 keys to success for being an expat in Africa?
Oh, interesting. So I did a study a while ago, and I've got some information about the success of expats. And don't rely only on your technical skills. So what we mean by that is only 15% of your success of your assignment is attributed to your technical skills. So the reason someone employs you. The other, 85% is all related to your adaptability and integration. And actually it's been said in this webinar is, when you get into a country, don't hang out with other expats. Go and mix with the locals, integrate, properly submerge yourself into the culture. It would help. I think coming to the first point, before you submerge, you need to be an adaptable person. So if you're a company sending expats, there are ways you can review if that assignee and family is suitable for that assignment and is going to be adaptable to those circumstances that they'll be facing. So I'd say those would be my top tips in terms of kind of understanding that it's much broader than just, you know, am I employable?
Great,
And
thank you.
for myself,
Yes.
a bit like Rene, I think the most important thing is you have to adapt yourself. What you will see, and each country is different, and it will be different from what you know, what you have seen. So be adaptable. This is the main key to succeed.
Thank you, Nicolas.
Bye bye, everyone. It was nice talking to you. I leave the floor to Bhavya now.
Exactly. Bhavya, you're the citizen of the world. You've been an expat in so many countries. So what are your top tips for those listening today?
Yeah, it's, I think some of it has been covered, but I think the first one I would say is, look, every place, no matter where you are, you go into, there will be something different. There will be something that you hadn't anticipated. So I'd say the first thing is embrace the unknown. Be kind of like curious, explore, immerse yourself, right? Don't just stay in a script room. The third thing I think would be stay hungry, because there's always more. There's always more to see. There's always new skills to develop. There's always new places to go. So stay hungry. And then lastly, to be able to enjoy the best of it, make sure your finances are sorted.
Very, very sound advice there, Bhavya. So what just leaves me then to thank our panelists for today, Rene, Nicolas and Bhavya. It's been a pleasure having this discussion with you. Thanks also to all of our audience for joining us. So any questions on any of the topics, particularly on the financial side, then don't hesitate to get in touch with Bank One, who will be able to help you, and look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.